Hey, you, you know, you should probably try breathing. Like just like many other creatures, we also need air, and that's cool and all. But have you heard of CO2? It's that one gas that is very abundant in our atmosphere, and that one gas is a really big contributor to the greenhouse effect. Well, it's something that keeps our Earth getting hotter and hotter. Now, naturally, there shouldn't be a greenhouse effect because the carbon cycle would have stayed in equilibrium the whole time. And just in case you don't know what the carbon cycle is, it's the way of nature. It's the way that nature recycles our carbon atoms by transporting them through different spheres, like our atmosphere, the ocean, etc. Usually, most living creatures, just like me and other humans, cows, horses, pigs, etc., they breathe out CO2 into the atmosphere. And plants, such as trees, flowers, etc., they, they breathe in that CO2 and expel oxygen into their atmosphere. But when animals die and they get absorbed into the earth, um, over time they become what we know as fossil fuels. But those fossils are filled with carbon. And what we humans discovered is that with fossils, we can turn them into fossil fuels that when burned, we get energy, which is a good thing. It is. But when we burn them, like in the process of burning them, all the carbon that was trapped inside the fossils get released into the atmosphere. And that CO2 should have never been released to the atmosphere in the first place. It should have stayed in the earth. Now, with this human interaction, the carbon cycle has not only added weights to one side of the balance of carbon and oxygen, but additionally have also found out that they can sell wood products which they cut from trees. And as you remember, trees are a plant. And plants are the ones that absorb the CO2 in the atmosphere. They help produce more oxygen rather than CO2. But we humans are cutting those trees down. And by doing that, we have less plants to go through photosynthesis, which is how we get rid of the CO2. But you might ask, what's wrong with a little bit of CO2 in our atmosphere? Well, remember the greenhouse effect? Yeah, it's been proven that all the carbon in our atmosphere has actually increased the temperature of our planet for a year, and that's not a good thing, by the way. Primarily because it leads to multiple positive feedback loops that don't help our planet get any colder, like our icebergs that reflect heat back up to space. Yeah, they are melting, causing more icebergs to melt because there are less reflective surfaces to prevent the absorption of heat. And this whole higher temperature thing has destroyed and affected huge amounts of animals in our planet. And if they might end up becoming extinct, many food chains or webs might end up collapsing, leading to even more extinctions. Now, although it might sound like all hope is lost, we still have some time to act upon it and present and perform solutions to this global issue. And with that mentality, I came up with mine. Now, in consideration that trees occupy a really large area and are beginning to be cut every single second, planting more at this point seems a little unreasonable. And as a matter of fact, did you know that usually more than half of the oxygen that you consume in every breath, half of it comes from the ocean, more specifically from phytoplankton? And with that in mind, I started thinking, why just not help the reproduction of phytoplankton instead of trees? And that is where it started. I wanted to place my solution in a place next to an ocean that gets really low levels during winter, so that I can make the reproduction and dispersion of phytoplankton possible. So what other place to choose than Japan? Now, I still need to find out a little bit more about phytoplankton. And it turns out that phytoplankton accounts for only 1% of the photosynthetic biomass on Earth. And it still pulls out around 50% of the oxygen that we breathe in. And that's even after its drop of 40% in population over the last 50 years. That's, for that small amount of biomass, the amount of CO2 it takes in almost surpasses trees. So that's why I feel like phytoplanktons are a way more effective option than trees. Well, phytoplankton derives from the Greek words phyto and plankton, which basically mean drifting plant, and that is true because plankton doesn't move anywhere. It's just taken by the ocean currents. Wherever the ocean currents go, the phytoplanktons will follow. Additionally, I also found out if phytoplanktons were to go extinct, our CO2 levels would have gone up to around 500 to 600 ppmv instead of its current 355 ppmv. That's almost double what we currently have. Sadly, we can't just have phytoplanktons being produced every single day, year-round, due to higher temperatures directly affecting their metabolism, making them reproduce less often than in colder weathers. Additionally, they like growing on ice, so I would have to wait until December and then proceed to keep breeding them only until February, which is the winter dates for Japan, because the temperatures are low enough to satisfy the phytoplankton's needs during that period of time. Now, after analyzing my data, I noticed that I'm going to need cold currents on Japan's waters that travel through a large portion of Japan so that my phytoplankton gets everywhere over Japan, not just one place. You know, sort of like the Oyashio currents, which travel through the top north of Japan all the way to almost half of it. And now, finally, after thorough analysis, I concluded that it would be most beneficial for my solution to place around 3 or more large-scale phytoplankton culture centers in the northeast coast of Hokkaido and Honshu. And once a large amount of phytoplankton is cultured, they can be released into the ocean around 80 to 90 miles away from the coast to ensure that they get picked up by the cold currents. And this would happen in a weekly basis throughout Japan's winter season.